To complete this lesson, we are going to finish our Spring Security Java configuration. If you remember, we were working within the Java Security Config class, which extends the Web Security Configure adapter. Inside of this class, we are going to provide our Java configuration for Spring Security to dictate its behavior. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start out by overriding one of the methods on Web Security Configure Adapter. So I'm just going to right-click on the class and then go to Source, and then I'm going to go to the Override and Implement Methods option, and I'm going to select the configure method, which accepts an Authentication Manager Builder as an argument. So we'll put this method in place, and let's take a look at what's going on here. So Spring is dependency injecting an Authentication Manager Builder into this method, and we can use that to set up the authentication for our application. The Authentication Manager Builder just follows a builder pattern. So we're going to see how we can chain all of our method invocations. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the in-memory authentication method to set up an in-memory data store to hold all of our users. So once we invoke this method, we can say with user, and we provide a username, and then we give that username's password, and then we provide roles for that user. And I'm just going to give him a role of user. So what this configuration does is it's going to protect every resource in the application. It's going to require us to authenticate when we want to access anything in the app. So let's restart our server, and then we're going to head over to the browser, and we will attempt to access the application's homepage. And when doing that, we should see that we are prompted to log in. So there are servers restarted, we provide our credentials of username and password, then we are able to log into the app. So let's log out. Now we're going to head back to our class, provide some more configuration. Now we know that in-memory data stores are not ideal. Essentially, we would like to have something a little bit more dynamic. So what we can do is we can provide JDBC authentication in this class. To do that, though, we need a data source. So I'm going to create a private data source, and we'll just name it data source. And we'll use the java.sql.datasource type, and we're going to add the auto-wired annotation so that Spring will take the data source configured within our application context.xml file and dependency inject that into this configuration class. And now we can invoke the JDBC authentication method and then set its data source using that data source that we have injected. So let's restart the app this time. And now we'll have to use the credentials for our user established within our init.sql file. If you remember, that was end-user with a password of password. So once our server has restarted, we'll be prompted with the login page. We can use end-user with the password of password, and that's coming from our database, and we're using our JDBC authentication in order to authenticate that user. Okay, next we are going to set up a user detail service. So you remember that we used a user detail service in order to integrate Spring Security with our custom user object of type AutoUser. So I'm just going to inject the user detail service bean, which is being picked up via component scanning. And now we're going to invoke the user detail service method on our authentication manager builder. And at this point, our user detail service is in place. The final piece of Java configuration we're going to put in place is a custom form. So once again, if we right-click on our class file and go to source, we can override a method. And we want to override the configure method now that accepts an argument of type HTTP security. So within this method, we work with the HTTP security object, which is very similar to the HTTP tag we would see within our XML configuration. So we use the HTTP object to invoke the form login method. And then we need to provide our login page, and we're going to specify that as /login. So when a GET request is sent to /login, we have our controller set up to return our login.jsp page. And then once the form on that login.jsp page is submitted, we want to forward the execution to our login processing URL, which is also /login. However, what discerns between the two is the method being a get or a post. Next, we can set a custom username parameter. If you remember, within our form, we were using custom_username. And we can also set a custom password parameter, and that was custom_password. So with those pieces of configuration in place, we then have a custom login form set up. And we did that by overriding one of those methods on the web security configure adapter, which allows us to conveniently set up our security configuration. So with this in place, I'm going to restart our server, and then we can navigate back to our application, and we'll attempt to access the home page. And when we do, we are going to see that our custom login page will be displayed when we attempt to sign in. So here I attempt to sign in, there's our custom login page, and I can log in with our end user as we saw with JDBC Authentication. So in this lesson, we took a look at Java configuration of Spring Security. Now, one important point is that your HTTP container must be Servlet 3.0 or higher. So there are some restrictions on Java configuration, just as there would be within Spring MVC. So you need to make sure you're using a relatively new servlet container. And as you work through the configuration, you'll uncover that there are many other configurations that you can put in place, and they really do mirror the XML configuration. So once you are familiar with XML configuration, making the leap over to Java config is not very difficult.